I'm your host, Jack, your failure connoisseur, and today my guest is Keegan Leary. Now, you probably know him as Webbae. He's the Bae of the Webflow community. He's got so much good stuff going on. He's got a course, he's working for FinSuite, he's building apps, and actually, today, it's a very special day to interview. He's just released Asset Bae, which was approved by Webflow this morning. Actually, if you listen to this was a month ago, but it's a very, very exciting time to interview him nonetheless. He is on fire at the moment. I keep seeing him on Twitter talking about all the incredible stuff he's doing. He's got a beautiful setup. If you're watching this on YouTube, you can see how good his setup is. He's going hard on content creation, which I'm sure we'll talk about in today's episode. But has it always been easy? Has he always been in the Webflow space making cool stuff? Or did he have a life before? We'll talk about all of this and more. So the failures that we'll talk about today are never use Webflow restore from backup. We're going to talk about an enterprise client that was very, very embarrassed. Protect your time and how he prices his course. So Keegan, welcome to the Webflow podcast.
Hey, thanks, Jack. Thanks for having me.
And I should say, thanks for coming back, because we recorded this. I messed up the recording and you were gracious enough to come back on and trust me to hopefully not mess it up for the second time. So thank you for coming back.
Of course, these are the things that happen, right?
This is the world we live in. You know, you think everything's going to go swimmingly and then it just doesn't. You know, you don't hit record or you go into an echoey room and completely mess up the audio. That was me. If anyone's listening thinking, why is Jack just laying into Keegan at the start of the episode? This is me who messed up, as you probably guessed from how chaotic I am as a human. Keegan, tell me what your relationship with failure is.
Pretty strong relationship with failure. I would say I really like learning new things. I was just talking with my partner yesterday, and we were talking about this idea of working on your strengths versus working on your weaknesses. And I think I'm a person who really likes working on their weaknesses, which is what people tell you not to do, I guess. But I get a lot of joy out of learning new things and experimenting and playing around. So that entails a lot of failure. And I think that's okay. But my other piece of failure comes kind of from my military background, where it's okay to fail, but you need to have a healthy understanding of what the consequences are or what they will be. And that kind of goes into some of the failures we'll talk about too. I think just knowing, like, if you're affecting other people's lives is kind of really where failure can be bad, I guess I would say.
See, you are the first guest that I've had on the podcast that was in the military. And I think as a result, you know, how you look at failure compared to your average Webflower who works in their underpants in their bedroom is a, very, very different scenario. You know, when someone says, hey, no one's going to die when it comes to web design and web development, like, well, you know, in different professions, some people might die and failure can be catastrophic. So yeah, it's a really interesting take that you have on failure.
Yeah, something I'm thinking about right now too is just last week, I was implementing cookie consent on a website, and it's fairly, my client has a pretty complex setup. It's got Segment and Google Tag Manager and all these third-party scripts. And, you know, you go in there and you turn them off, or you tag them marketing and whatever to turn them on or off based on how people select on their cookie banner. But one of those scripts actually controls attribution. And as a follow on of that, the attribution controls how much salespeople and marketers are getting paid on their commissions. So you're affecting people's livelihood now if you screw that up. And I didn't realize that kind of until, I guess, a meeting I had like a week into the project. And we were on a pretty tight deadline to get this done by the CTO, but it gave us a lot of ammo, I guess, to kind of push back and be like, we need to maybe slow down a little bit here if we're affecting people's livelihoods. So definitely within, you know, being a freelancer in Webflow, it's it's possible to screw up other people's lives too. So I'm trying to have a healthy understanding for that as well.
Yeah. And this actually links to a conversation that I had with Jess Rosenberg about imposter syndrome. She was saying that, you know, you can actually be an imposter. Like you might not have like a very healthy relationship with your own self-worth, and like you might actually have the skill sets to be able to do stuff and you feel like an imposter even when you're not. But she also said maybe you actually are an imposter. Maybe you do need to learn the skills that you're lacking. Maybe this is a sign that you're like, hey, I'm a bit out of my depth here. I need to actually kind of read up about whatever it is, cookie consent and maybe scripts that affect attribution, etc. Like there are real consequences, even if no one's necessarily going to die. You know, if you are doing a site migration, for example, that's a big deal. Like if suddenly traffic massively drops because you haven't actually thought about URL structures or whatever it is, then yeah, it's a real problem. You are actually going to affect people's livelihoods. So I think having like a healthy balance between, thinking, failure, I'm going to ride through it and I'm going to learn from whatever it is, etc. Like that's all well and good, but it's just being aware of, maybe problems before they happen. Before
Yeah.
you get to failure, what can you do to negate that?
I love that idea. Sometimes you are an imposter. Just last week, I was like, hey, I need to actually like go read. I just need to read for like half a day the documentation here. And I'm sure my Jira tickets, this client uses Jira, are annoying because I put my learnings like in the tickets sequentially. So I'm like, well, today I found out that, XYZ, this setup is tough because it's kind of a legacy setup and there's been a lot of turnover at the company. So nobody totally understands like the marketing tech stack. And so we're all trying to figure that out and make sure we know what lives where, what is actually being used, what's not. So it's a pretty heavy audit at the same time of like a drastic kind of user experiments implementation and change. So
hey, I'm sure they're appreciative of you actually going through and doing, because it's kind of like site audits, I think, are just not talked about enough. Like, oh my God, you might think, oh, it's we need a new website. Okay, it's a simple site migration. And then actually there's all those 401 redirects and there's redirects to redirects. And like, then there's, they're using HubSpot and it's like, okay, how does that integrate with the website? And there's all these different external third-party tools that they're using, maybe a load of plugins. Do you understand what all those plugins are even doing? Are they all necessary? How do they then translate to Webflow? Like that part of the Webflow process, I think, is just so under talked about. This site audit, it sounds so boring, and maybe it is to some people, but actually I just think, oh God, it makes life so much easier if you do that bit properly.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, question. You are making all these different apps. You are also doing all these crazy running events with your wife. You've got part-time work at FinSuite. Like, what the hell is going on? Why are you doing all these different things and what motivates you?
That's a big question. I am motivated. I just like, it goes back to like enjoying learning. I like learning new tools. I like new things. And I'm just captivated by this idea of passive income and building an online presence and an audience and kind of having your own special brand. So it's kind of a combination of things. I grew up in Silicon Valley, and so I think that whole like tech entrepreneur vibe thing like really caught my attention as a kid. And so I'm trying to just live that out if I can. As far as like building apps and putting things in public, it's a lot of, I see it as marketing if it's something that's free, and also learning. I think that by creating content and by making things that other people use, it forces us to learn tools and learn what we're teaching a lot more. So it's just a combination of a lot of things, which is just to say I want to be really good at programming. I enjoy the problem solving aspect of program where it's like, I don't understand this thing, but time after time I have encountered this where I don't understand how to do something. I've researched it and prototyped some ideas, and then I've shipped something and it works. And if you do that over and over, your confidence builds and your skill set increases. And I just love the idea of saying like, I built this, tinkering and saying, I totally understand how this works. So I guess it's like a professionalism piece. For me, it's important to be a professional at something and to be known and recognized. So that's, I don't know. There's definitely some vanity in there. I want to earn some money. I want to be known for my efforts. So that's lumped in there somewhere too.
That's awesome. I mean, I definitely think that you are someone that, as someone that's insanely curious and wants to like get better at things that you're not very good at, it seems like you push yourself really hard with everything you do. I mean, the like running events, like you're doing a lot of training, you're pushing yourself really hard to, do things that you maybe haven't done before, and vice versa in your professional life. Like you're doing courses, you're putting yourself out there in a way that I think a lot of Webflowers would maybe struggle to do that. And so can you tell us a little bit about like why you're focusing so much on content and how you're thinking about that?
Sure. Well, thanks for the nice words. It's coming from you. It feels very special because I really love your podcast and what you're doing. So the question was about how I think about creating content. Is that?
Yeah. Like, why are you creating so much content?
It gets back to this passive income idea. So having like a lot of times my videos that are 6 months old will get picked up and like start generating revenue through ads and just gaining brand awareness and authority in my niche, as well as brand awareness, which I already said. So that's kind of how I think about it. And I try not to overthink it. At least I try not to, but I do all the time. And that, there's so many good YouTubers out there, and there's so many good creative content creators, and there's so many good web developers, and you can easily fall into this comparison trap of comparing yourself to other people. But my growth has not been exponential. It's been linear. Like, it is very linear, and I don't have stuff that explodes or goes viral, but over time, if I can get a video out per week over 2 years, the effect does compound. My growth is still linear, but the growth in terms of brand awareness and authority, and I guess ways to build other revenue streams, grows. So that's what's unique about it, and that's how I try to think about it.
Yeah, and I guess that also lends itself to your course and all the different apps that you have. It's like this kind of network effect where you're being known for the thing that you want to be known for. You're pushing yourself. Curiosity is growing. There's different income streams that become like tributaries leading to the main river. And also you're like pushing yourself in a way that is just like constantly growing your comfort zone. And then you're like just embracing failure as you go. You're just getting better and better from all the different lessons that you're learning, and across content, across programming, teaching people. It's just a majestic way to live. Look at you go, Keegan.
Yeah. I need my little King Rove or something.
It's awesome. Honestly, I think the content piece that people often overlook is that you don't need to create content about things that like are perfect, that you can just share content of whatever you're working on as you're working on it. And I think there's this idea that I love, which is, if say you've broken down at the side of the road and you're trying to push the car, and people can see you push that car as it's broken down by the side of the road, other people are way more likely to come and help you push that car. But if you're just doing fuck all sat by the side of the road next to your car that's broken, they're not going to even know that your car's broken down, and they're not even going to realize that maybe you need help. But I think that's the beauty of sharing like what you're doing as you're doing it, and the process behind making a course, or like asking people about what their YouTube setup is, and being like, here's my setup, here's what I'm doing. And then they're kind of invested in your success. And then there's this like groundswell effect of when you do finally release that paid product or that website that you've been spending months working on, they've kind of like been warmed up to that idea before it's even kind of come to pass. Does that resonate with you?
It does. Yeah. When you said people being invested in your success, when I started, I did not expect that at all. But there are people who are just like are interested, as if you share, they're interested in what your journey is and kind of want to see you succeed. And it's pretty cool. So I think there's, people like stories. They like a hero. They like a narrative, this kind of thing, I would think. So I'm trying to read more about storytelling and see how I can integrate that into my personal brand as I, make a tweet about whatever app is coming out or about what I'm working on. So it's very powerful and something that I want to get better at. Another weakness I'm trying to develop.
Hey, you are someone that wants to get better, and that is the primary thing that I think most people don't even do. They don't even acknowledge that they have a problem that needs to be solved. So I think you are well on the way. So much of the time, I think people don't even realize that they have a problem, or they can't pinpoint what exactly is the pain point that's causing them the anguish that they're in. Yeah, it's like someone going to the doctors saying, hey, I need meds for stress. And the doctor's like, well, what's your diet? How much are you sleeping? Who are you surrounded by? And it's like all these causes that are actually causing the stress, and they don't need the meds at all. They actually just need to change their lifestyle habits. Anyway, I'm going off on a little tangent here. Let's get back into your story. Tell me about failure number 1, almost sinking a sub in port.
Yeah, let's talk about this one. So we'll change gears a little bit. It's a bit technical, so I don't always know how to tell this story, even though I've told it a number of times already. So I was a submarine officer in charge of this maintenance evolution to fix the main ballast tanks on a submarine. And are you familiar with what the main ballast tanks are?
The big tanks on the side of the submarine?
They're in the front and the back, actually.
I was joking. Yeah.
There's 33% of the submarine is essentially empty space. And it's filled with air when we're on the surface and just like transiting along on top of the water. But when we want to submerge, we fill those main ballast tanks with water. If you've ever been scuba diving, like using your buoyancy compensator device, you put air into it or take air out, and you're trying to achieve this neutral buoyancy. We also have variable ballast so that we can trim and like adjust our depth, but those main ballast tanks are what it takes to get however many million tons of steel from surface mode to submerged mode. And we had some maintenance that I was in charge of on those when we were in port. And in order to do that requires some fancy valve lineups and some understanding of physics, especially, is it Archimedes principle that does buoyancy, I think? Anyways, let's ask you a question. Have you...
Not talking to the right guy, I'm afraid.
It's kind of like I don't like calling things simple. Somebody once said like, "Oh, I love your simple app," and they didn't know that I had worked on it for like months and months. But whatever. On the outside, these things are simple, but it depends on who you're talking to, right? So if we take a straw and like submerge it in some water with your thumb on top of it, what happens inside of the straw? Could you describe that?
Water increases volume in the straw.
Well, we put it.
Not volume. Wait. So what are you doing with the straw? You're just putting it straight in the water.
No, you have your thumb on the straw and then you put it in the water.
Okay, that's going to push down the water in the straw.
Well, there's no water in the straw to start. It's just out in the air.
Oh, fuck. This is like GCSE science, and this is why I failed it. Okay, talk to me.
This is the real reason we're re-recording the podcast.
Okay, so the thumb on straw. If anyone's listening to this and they're like, Jack, you're such an idiot. I know. Took you 91 episodes to realize it. Okay, so thumb on top of the straw in the water. That's going to push down the water in the straw.
Right. Let's be clear. There's no water in the straw, but it's just all air.
As in water in the cup, no?
Yeah.
As in like there's a cup full of water. You're pushing down.
Let me ask it. What will happen to the level of the water in the cup?
It's going to go up?
Yes. Right? Because you have air in that straw and you're basically creating a seal on top and you're pushing in. So you're displacing the water with the air in the straw. And now with the straw.
I got that right.
Yeah, you nailed
50-50.
Nailed it. 50. Oh, we have a phrase called 50-50-90, which is mean that like you can get it right or wrong, but 90% of the time you're going to get it wrong. That's one of my favorite phrases. Anyways, so we've got our straw in our water. And if we lift our thumb and so we break that seal, what happens next?
Water is going to go up inside the straw, down in the cup.
Yeah. So we'll observe the water level in the cup go down and the water in the straw go up. So this is the principle behind doing maintenance on your main ballast tanks. The way these tanks work is they just have a valve on top and they have an empty grate on the bottom. So if those valves have any leakage, then water can easily leak into our main ballast tanks. They are split in half. So if like one is leaking, you can get a list to the side or like, forward or backward. All these nasty things can happen. And our hypothesis was that there was leakage in between the cross-connected tanks, but also leakage from the top valves. And so it was a Friday afternoon and I was in charge of this maintenance evolution. And you put these kind of special covers on top of those valves. And what we had done is we had actually just messed up the valve lineup. So we were venting these tanks on purpose and I'm on top of the conning tower and they're doing quarters on the pier, which is done every Friday afternoon, which is like the whole crew and the captain are up there and they're like, like congratulations to Seaman Timmy for whatever, like, I don't know, doing 12 maintenance items today and everybody claps. But this maintenance evolution is like an 8-hour affair. So I'm up there all day and I have a walkie-talkie and I'm talking to about 7 other guys who are monitoring things. And quarters on the pier is just finishing up and I'm starting to notice that the ship is listing to the side a bit. And we're not observing kind of the response that we're expecting to observe, which is these bubblings to stop, which basically shows that you're emptying the tank because we're trying to pump this excess water out of it. And so there's just like a number of things happening all at once. And the biggest one is that the captain on board comes on board because quarters is over and says, Lieutenant Leary, like, why is the ship at a 7-degree list? Which 7 degrees doesn't sound much, but when you are in a sub, it actually is a lot. And I had just noticed it. And so I was trying to correct it. And now, of course, the captain is asking me what's going on. And so the moral of the story is we screwed up the valve lineup and we're leaking these tanks on purpose, I guess. And if I had let it go more, the tanks could have filled up with water. And eventually, like, we have hatches open. And so if water gets over the side and comes in the hatches, then you're bringing water into places where water's not supposed to be. And so you could essentially sink the submarine in port. But we secured from the lineup and corrected everything. So we stayed safe, but it was embarrassing because there had already been an officer that tried to do this maintenance evolution 3 weeks before I did it. So we obviously didn't learn what our mistake was the first time. And you never like getting things wrong, right? And just the fact that the consequences were so high that I could have made that big of an error, like something that could probably make newspaper headlines, was discomforting.
God, I can't think of a time in life when I've actually put other people in danger by virtue of like not fully understanding the gravitas of whatever situation I'm like, or the problem that I'm facing. Like normally it's just an exam question that I'm just like, what's the fucking point? But this is real life. You are literally kind of in charge of 7 men, did you say, who were like trying to deal with this problem that could have put people's lives in danger. But glad that you righted it.
Yeah, there were seven guys kind of on the team doing the maintenance with me, and a lot of these guys had been doing this kind of stuff for 15 to 20 years. And I had this salty Navy diver who had done this maintenance evolution, 30, 40 times. And I was just a little surprised that we, between all that experience, we could get this so wrong. And then on top of that, the whole crew is on top of the pier watching the captain yell at me. So there's a public embarrassment factor big time.
Okay, I know that this may be a bit of a tenuous link, but I'm going to try it. I think regardless of your experience level, there are problems that you face with freelancing or agency life that you literally just couldn't see coming. There's just stuff that happens that goes wrong and that you've got to deal with it. And I think the more you've had those types of experiences, the more you've just seen problems for years, the more you can have a calm pretense to be like, okay, look, this is a problem, we're going to deal with it and not panic in that situation. Has this experience in the Navy helped you, do you think, at all in agency life with FinSuite or creating the apps you've done, creating the courses that you've done? Do you think you've now got the sense of perspective to actually just deal with problems as they come without panicking?
Definitely. Yeah, I think there's two things that I can think of. One is being able to recognize a problem when it's happening, and that kind of forecasting the future of this is going to be, there's something important here that we need to stop and understand better. There's, a lack of understanding across the board. And that's, if I had more experience, I feel, well, I hope I could recognize that. I think I have gotten better at recognizing that and really sitting down to explain what is it that we don't understand and how do we go about understanding it better. The other piece of that is understanding that you can understand a complicated problem. And so, the fallout of this error was that this was on a Friday, we all met on Saturday the next day. Obviously, I didn't want to be working on Saturday, but now I had a full workday on Saturday where we basically read through the procedure line by line as a group and totally I became the expert on main ballast tank maintenance within probably a span of 1 week. So it was pretty incredible how fast I was able to kind of get up to speed, and my team as well. Just really know, okay, this is the error we made. This is why we made that error. And this is how we can prevent it in the future.
Okay. This reminds me, weirdly, of one agency that I work for. They basically had a post-mortem. I don't know if you ever go on a night out and then after the night out, the next day, your mates are all in the kitchen. You're all just feeling a bit shit.
And you have the best part of a night out. That's
the best part of the night out. It's the pre and the post.
Mm-hmm.
It's not actually the night out for me. I don't really go on nights out anymore. But anyway, my point is that the post-mortem after the website, there's all sorts of stuff that happens with clients, and it's not necessarily as smooth as you'd like it to be. And then afterwards, you can regroup and be like, okay, what went well? What didn't go so well? What do we need to change in our SOPs to make sure that this type of thing never happens again? And I think it's one of the most important things that you can do. Everyone talks about having SOPs, but a lot of the time in agencies, they don't even look at their SOPs while they're doing client work, I find. And you're just like, what the fuck is the point of the SOPs if no one's following them and just everyone's just individually doing their own process? Whereas if you have this post-mortem, you all look at the SOPs and be like, we need to change this so that you kind of collectively turn back and be like, okay, what went wrong there? What do we need to write? Or what went well that maybe we need to double emphasize so that anyone that's doing client projects in the future, really make sure this happens. But yeah, does that relate? Do you resonate with that idea?
Definitely. The postmortem that we had, one of the results of that was we rewrote or recommended a rewrite of the procedure. And so we basically sent off a draft of hey, here's where we got confused in the procedure, and here's how we think you could change the wording to make it better. So that was one piece of it. We do joke a lot about how almost every time out of these postmortems, we just get larger checklists. The Navy, or the submarine force in the Navy itself, actually does a very good job of using their checklists, though. We have a procedure for how to use checklists. So we have a checklist for our checklist, right? We do this Circle X procedure where you circle an item that you're working on, and when you're done with it, you exit out and then you circle the next one. So this also helps other people complete the checklist for you or with you. So you have a team and they can see oh no, you missed step 4. Because anytime you're the officer in charge and you're going through a checklist on a maintenance item, there's at least 1 or 2 other people going through the same checklist. And so you all make sure that you're on kind of the same spot. But it's very easy to dismiss a checklist because it has a lot of steps that you're so familiar with and that you're used to doing. So if you're going to use a checklist, you have to have the right culture around using a checklist. And basically, a lot of those things are kind of, to use another phrase, written in blood or written in sweat, I guess. And so it's having an understanding and a healthy respect for that should be important, I guess.
Awesome. So if anyone's listening to this and it's yeah, what's the submarine story got to do with Webflow? I actually think it has a lot to do with Webflow and freelancing and agency work, actually. Like, basically, systems and processes, as boring as that phrase is, and as much as everyone bangs on about them, they do really, really matter. And especially when you're working in the bigger the team, I think the more important those checklists are as well. So, don't overlook doing the basics well. It means that you're going to have way less stress. No one's going to die. No submarines are going to turn 7 degrees. And, everyone's going to be happy, to to continue the metaphor of the submarine and the Webflow.
John Saunders comes to mind. He's always going on about his SOPs. So I bet they have a good culture around it at their agency.
Yeah, really tight. And I recommend his course as well. Not that I'm getting paid for it, just in case anyone's just like, oh, you're getting paid to say that. No, I'm not.
Maybe you should get paid to say it.
Hey, John D. Saunders, hit me up.
Yeah, let's get him. Let's get this man paid.
Okay, tell me about failure number 2. Never use Webflow Restore from backup.
This was, actually, the headline isn't really relevant anymore because of a change that Webflow made, but I think it still applies here. What happened here was that I was working on a website that was it was like Rev 4 of this blog for a really great client. The work was going really well. I really enjoyed working with these guys. And the result of this blog kind of being on its 4th revision, though, was that there was a lot of conditional visibility and just stuff going on. So it was another complicated kind of piece. And I was restructuring the CMS to support some new features. And what I ended up doing was not screwing up the CMS, but when I re-imported the data, I noticed, I think it's the date field, like we lost the published on date. And so it's like, oh, just restore backup to bring the CMS back into its original state, which it did. But one, restoring from backup is really nerve wracking because it can take like 5 minutes and Webflow doesn't really give you a progress bar or anything. It just is, I think it's kind of like a blank page or a spinning wheel. And then it'll say it errored, but then you reload the page and oh, lo and behold, it did restore actually successful. But you're like, wait, it said it errored. So these sort of things happen. But the big piece that I need to get to is that it remapped all the IDs of the CMS items. So the IDs got mapped to new IDs. And this client had a lot of Airtable automations with those IDs that I didn't know about. So I ended up breaking all of their automations in Airtable. I was very forthright about having done the backup and what I was doing. I wasn't hiding anything, but there was definitely like, I felt like I had lost their trust and I felt really bad for that. And I knew that I had created a lot of extra work for them. And I offered to try to help as much as I could, but I think they were just frustrated with me to the point that they didn't want me to touch anything else on their beloved project. And then also, I tried to do the best customer service I could. I had almost $2,000 worth of hours already banked with them and I didn't charge them for that. So just tried to do everything I could to make it right and just felt really terrible that I had done that and got really frustrated at Webflow, the backup feature, but also knew that I had an idea that this was something that happens, and probably before a big thing like that, I should have stopped. We just talked about having the experience to be able to stop. And sometimes like you said, sometimes these things just happen. And it was embarrassing. It was disappointing. It was tough. And especially now because Webflow has kind of fixed that, I guess. Your CMS item IDs will persist between backups, but I still tell people hold off on a backup. Maybe we can copy paste something over here or pick and choose what we need to restore. So that's that story.
This reminds me of a conversation that I had with Kendra, who was my old boss at Edgar Allan. But she basically said that she wished when she was a younger creative that she asked more questions. And I think there's a worry. And just like you said, you were like, well, I'm the expert and the client's paying me. I'm just going to hit restore. And you wish that you paused and just said, whoa, let's just take a breath here and just make sure that this is the right decision. And I think there's this idea of not wanting to look stupid by essentially either slowing down the process by stopping and saying, let's have a conversation, or feeling like you should know the answer to questions that you want to ask but don't have the courage to. And I think one of the ballsiest things you can do is prepare to look like an idiot and actually be like, you know what, I actually don't know this. I don't know this one, guys. I think we need to just take a beat, work out exactly how this is going to work. Even if the deadline's tight, maybe we should push back the deadline, or just say to the client, I need to know this information before we move forward. Can we just have a really frank conversation where, maybe I'm going to ask things that show that I'm not the expert that you think I am potentially.
Yeah. And to go on with that, if you do the non-sexy thing of saying, hey, let's delay this for a week. and you do, and you guys work through the problem and you avoid like some sort of catastrophic failure, you're probably not going to get recognized. Like nobody, because the catastrophic failure didn't happen, right? Like people would just say, oh, we missed our deadline because Webbae said, hey, like I still need to understand this thing. So yeah, it's like compounded by this fact that you won't get recognized for avoiding a problem. You only get recognized for fixing a problem, I guess. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's like, the failure never happened, so you're not like lauded as a hero for avoiding that failure. You're just like, oh, you just did the job.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
You did the job,
It's
but you're late, kind of thing.
But I would also say though that, like, if and this maybe just comes with perspective, like once you've done a website migration and fucked it up, like that things maybe are going to take longer if they are going to change all the tags and references when they do the spring cleaning, which inevitably happens when you do a website migration and things like that. But it just comes from, maybe having the perspective to be like, look, we're not going to hit the deadline here. And knowing, when that inevitably happens and you recognize that, saying it as early as possible to the client, like having that difficult conversation, having the confidence to say, hey, I said that I would get it done by this date, and I've realized that is not realistic for this reason, this reason, this reason. And just kind of laying your cards out, I think is actually a really, really powerful thing to do. Just to say, look, I don't know how to do this, or I don't know if this is going to be done in time, or I think we should push back. Like, maybe having that conversation and preempting, like having that perspective. Do you know what I mean?
It's really easy to assume that other people know what's going on. Also, guaranteed, if you have a question, somebody else has the same question. And doesn't know what's going on. Somebody's just better at faking it than, maybe not better, but you're all just faking it at that point.
Yeah, it's I think asking the obvious questions often have, like, the simple questions often have the most nuanced answers as well. Like maybe the dumb question actually will open up doors for a really, really interesting conversation where people will tell you information that you would never have got unless you ask them like a really forthright question. So there's so many benefits for asking the dumb question or hitting pause and just being like, look, we need to take a beat here and just make sure that, we don't lose all the IDs when we hit restore or whatever it is,
I felt so bad on that one. It took a week to kind of recover, and then another week to just move on, I guess. I don't know.
I would say though that is well worth the $2,000 lesson. Yeah, that's a pretty big failure, I guess. But I would say that, you are now going to take a beat before doing any big, so easy to just click a button and be like, oh, just restore it, bang. And then suddenly you're like, fuck.
Yeah, it's the tuition.
And now,
it's our tuition.
Yeah, and now you've got that lesson for life. So I think that's really powerful. And you've shared it here as well. So that £2,000 is being spread across 2,000 listeners a month, which is pretty sexy too. So I think that's powerful. And if anyone's like, oh, this seems like such an obvious thing, like obviously take a beat before doing decision making. I've seen it in teams where, imagine like everyone is kind of going off intuition, and it's just gets a bit like, cowboys at a shootout with a website. I think it's like a cultural thing as much as, an individual thing. So definitely worth considering that.
Yeah, a good read has been Kara Swisher's Burn book. She's been a tech columnist for over 20 years, and she just kind of starts out in this honeymoon phase with tech, and she moves from New York to Silicon Valley and just is really enamored by how tech companies are working to change the world. And then over more than 20 years, she just realizes it's all about the bottom line. It's all about creating value for shareholders, which is done by serving ads and selling user data. So she kind of turns to this pessimistic tone. She's still an optimist, but she brings a lot of pessimism to kind of the tech life and the tech startup mentality, which I think is very healthy. So if you're looking for a book to read, it's a good one that was recently released.
God, it sounds quite sad, Keegan, but okay. Yeah.
I mean, it's good. She's a very she's a firecracker. She's got a lot of personality in her writing. So I got through it really fast, but yeah, it is a little sad. That's okay.
Hey, sometimes bad news is good news, or at least honesty is the best policy and all of that jazz. One last thing that I want to say before we move on as well about all of this stuff is that having those difficult conversations early, I think, is one of the hardest but most important things to learn. And when you realize that there is a problem, have it as early as possible, because oftentimes deadlines are not real deadlines. Like, client says, I need this done really quickly. And you might just take that at face value and be like, okay, they said it, they want it quickly, let's go. But actually, oftentimes it's far more malleable than that. And especially if they know the gravitas of the consequences of moving faster than they need to. So
Yeah, that's where communication skills come in handy. If you're like, if we mess this up, XYZ is going to happen, then people are more likely to say like, oh, okay, yeah, I didn't mean, I did say get this done Friday, but I didn't understand that. So let's, you have to be able to
Exactly.
communicate your knowledge or lack of knowledge.
Yeah. Hey, either way, open communication as early as possible is really healthy. Something that's taken me 28 years to learn. Tell me about failure number 3, pricing your course.
This is just inexperience. When I had really wanted to release a course, I was very proud of it. I did the Figma design, recorded it, did the Webflow development all in 7 days, and was just really hoping to have some sort of course out. And it was kind of, I wanted to price it where somebody could make an impulse buy, like I want to learn Webflow. Oh, this guy has a pretty good looking course for less than $100. And how do I price this thing? So what I ended up doing was just confusing myself by offering it at higher anchor price, I think of like $70, but offering 50% off for the first week. The feedback I got, I think you could get the course for $20 pretty easily if you wanted to. And the feedback I got was just like, I would pay double this, and that's the anchored price too. People would pay $100 to $200. So it was so hard to understand, where do I price this thing? Because you have some people who are pricing courses at multiple hundreds of dollars, and you have other people, you can go on Udemy and buy a Webflow course for $10 to $20 too. And those are pretty good also. I think what I learned from that probably is that your experience does actually fold into how much you can charge for a course, no matter how good it is. My failure there was maybe not asking ahead of time and getting a little more feedback from the community on what they think a fair price would be.
Pushing the car, by the way,
Pushing
by
the car.
motorway.
Yeah. Let the people help you.
Yeah, let them show you the way and give you a bit of thrust. I think it's an interesting point though. Like, there are courses that are thousands of dollars, like online courses. And you're like, what is the difference between this and, just a course on, well, I mean, there's incredible courses for free on YouTube. And you're like, wow, there's literally like, coding courses that are like, okay, over the course of 10 hours, each video is like 20 minutes or half an hour. And it's amazing the free education that you can get. So it is a difficult balance to try and understand that. Have you got an answer with how much you should price your course, or is it still up in the air?
Still up in the air from me. I think you want to look at similar courses, what's being offered. I think the main value for like an asynchronous course is that somebody puts some money on the line. So they've really shown that they want to learn this thing, and they're kind of forcing them, like basically betting on themselves to finish this thing. Like, I'm going to put some money on the line that I'll do this course and get through it. The other thing a course can really provide value is by like giving one coherent set of instructions. Whereas a lot of, like, at least my YouTube content is shorter and directed at individual things. There is, more cohesive YouTube content out there too on how to do something from A to Z. But yeah, I think what happens is you just price it and get some reactions and you go from there. Something that made me say like, oh, it's okay that I did this wrong is just looking at larger companies and how they change their pricing, and just like they change it drastically. And sometimes it upsets users, and sometimes users say like, oh no, that's fair. Like Netflix, is changing their subscription models and all this stuff. But Unity had the big pricing change that upset game developers big time. So it's gets back to communication and let people know that you're just, I don't think anybody expects you to offer a free service without some sort of kickback. I think people expect if you create something that you can get compensated for it. You just have to figure out what that value piece is, where it lies.
Yeah, definitely. I think the interesting thing that's happening in the course world for me is this cohort-based course model, where instead of just having like a video course, there's one-to-one calls included or group calls included, or you'll do the online piece of the course and then you'll meet at the end of the week to review what you've done or something like that. I think Jay Klaus is probably one of the kind of leading people in this space. I'm not sure if you've ever seen Creator Science Lab, his community, but it's a really, really interesting model. They've got a set number of people, so there's a cohort of I think 200 people, and people that are in the community will actually host their own events within the community and things like that. So it's a really interesting model.
Yeah, it's powerful. I think it's just
differently.
It's a lot of work from my understanding. So it makes sense to charge a lot more for those. The other thing I like about those is the completion rate is just way higher, but it takes a lot more work. So it's just, if you have the time and the ability, then sure. But it's just not something I can execute yet. Maybe one day. But yeah, I think it's a good model.
Yeah. I'm not trying to say like, listen, here's what you should do.
Yeah,
by
yeah.
the way,
No, I know. It is interesting. I've taken one myself and I did appreciate it. It was I did try a lot harder than some other courses I've bought, so it makes sense.
Yeah, that's the thing. I mean, I've got awards courses that I've never done because I got them on, a Black Friday sale for $10 or whatever. And I'm just like, yeah, I'll do them someday. And but I guess it's kind of like the accountability factor is something that people obviously pay for with courses, that it's not just about the raw information itself, which
and you make
find.
friends. Like you could make friends with people who are in the same place as you. And a lot of times learning from somebody who's not an expert is a lot better than, because you're afraid to ask that or you're not as afraid to ask that dumb question. Somebody like will understand the context of your knowledge to help you along. So there's a ton of value in that too.
Yeah, definitely makes a ton of sense. So if anyone is listening who is thinking about setting up a course or trying to work out how best to do it, I think essentially maybe there is no right way or a wrong way, but you'll quickly find out if you've done it wrong, I guess.
Yeah, and you can try to find that out before you actually launch the course. If you ask people like, hey, here's the course, would you pay, $100 for this thing? Ask that to 5 people and you'll have a good idea of where to go.
Yeah, definitely. I think sometimes people just release a course like without any build up and then they just fall flat because no one really understands any context for the course coming to life. So yeah, I think that all plays a part in pricing. But I feel like this is a bit of a dark art not a dark art, but the whole course world is there's probably a hench formula on how to do it, which includes email marketing strategy and like all of this type of stuff.
There's so many online courses. It's incredible. But I still sold a lot more than I expected. So it was a big success for me as an experiment and as something I was trying to just use for brand awareness and building authority in my niche. It was amazing.
Definitely.
I got brought on this podcast because... yeah.
Hey, that's the only reason why, because you made a course.
Yeah.
No, but I do think that it kind of comes back to what we said towards the start of the podcast, where you were talking about how content creation actually helps you develop your personal brand. It helps awareness for what you do. And that might lead to client work or collaborations or friendships. And there's so many benefits to quote unquote, putting yourself out there, this idea of sharing what you're doing as you're doing it, and amazing things happen from there. So regardless of anyone's like listening to this, like I'm not going to make a course. What's this about? It's actually maybe just the broader idea of making something of value for other people and, seeing where that goes. I think that's an important idea to touch upon. Is there anything else that we need to talk about before I ask you the most difficult question of the podcast?
Let's hop into it.
Are we going straight on in there? Yeah. Okay, you sound very confident.
I don't have anything else.
Tell me, what is your next failure going to be?
Oh, what's the next failure going to be? I'm trying to think of like what's going on this weekend. What's going on with life? Well, we mentioned Webbae is coming out. Webflow approved it, but it's still probably a few days before it actually releases. There's going to be something with it. It's my first app where I've used a backend, so I have to store user data and keep track of their credits and send them to Stripe to hopefully get a little bit of money here and there, scrounge up some pennies. And just something's going to go wrong with it, and somebody will tell me, and I'll try to fix it, and hopefully it doesn't. Hopefully somebody doesn't try to give me thousands of dollars and then say, "Hey, your app broke," when I tried to give you thousands of dollars. But if you do run into that problem and you're one of my app users, just send me a message. I know I'll be very helpful. So that's the failure that I'm looking forward to.
And tell us a little bit about, like, just before we finish, because I feel like we can't just say, Webbae might be the next failure that's coming. What is Webbae? Tee us up for what's to come out in a few days.
It's a designer extension that when you open it, you can manage your asset display names and alt text right in like one UI, whereas normally in Webflow, you have to click into each one to change the alt text. With this, you can do it all from one UI, and you can select multiple items at once and use AI to generate like really descriptive alt text. That's what it does.
I'm sold.
Yeah.
I'm sold. Take my money.
Yeah, people have been giving me really, I've been pumping it on Twitter for like 2-3 weeks now, and people have been getting excited for it. So of course, when you generate more hype, there's more pressure to deliver as well. So, but hey, Webflow reviewed it and said it's good, so must be all right.
It is really annoying adding alt text to all the images in that little funny panel on the left and in the image panel. So I'm down. I think it's going to be sick.
Cool, man.
And very excited to get paid for a sponsorship to promote it on the podcast.
Hell yeah.
But no, it's epic that that's coming out, and I'm very, very excited to hear more about your next failure when we get you back on the podcast in a year time or so with Webbae. I'm sure you will have plenty of learnings to share on that, just like you have from doing the course and all the other amazing things that you're doing currently.
I'll save them up for you. I just want to say I really admire your community building ability. The London event you did recently looked so cool, and
Oh, awesome.
I really admire that. I think you're amazing at doing that. So thanks for doing that. I need to make a trip across the pond now, just so that I can get over the FOMO of missing out on London events.
Ah, yeah. I think I'm so excited for Webflow Conf. There's so much hype around it. I think because Dan from Raylin was like, which conference should I go to? And there's like a thread of being like London,
Yeah,
London,
yeah, yeah,
London,
yeah.
London.
They're not
So
wrong, man. They're not wrong.
the hype is real. Let's
Yeah.
hope we don't let them down either. But no, it's yeah. That's very sweet of you to say that. I'm really glad that you and other people really appreciate the community stuff. I think the in-person stuff is just next level. You give people a big old hug and just actually chat in a way that obviously you kind of know of people in the Twitter space and in the Webflow space. But yeah, it's quite a special
it's easy
thing.
to get lonely as a freelancer. It's lonely out here. So the hugs and the in-person events are they're so special. So keep doing that.
I think
I think it's great.
Physical touch is my love language as well. So
All
maybe
right.
that's a
Thank
big
you
part
for
of
sharing
it.
that. Thank you.
Hey, it's all laid out. You've got to lay out your cards on this podcast. So we talk about securities and insecurities. That's my love language. So when
Right
you
on.
come to London, you better watch out.
All right,
You better watch out, Keegan.
big hug inbound.
But no, thank you for sharing as vulnerably as you have on Webflow. You've been an excellent guest. I knew you would because you've already come on, but thank you for sharing as vulnerably as you have.
Right on. Thanks, Jack.